Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is November 7th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. We are going to be continuing our conversation here today on free market capitalism. And I want to do this because this is actually going to make this episode a little bit more interactive with some of the audience, simply because I received a couple comments. One was in regards to yesterday's podcast, and another one was from a podcast that was done a little while ago. But clearly, you can find those older podcasts on our website, thecapitalnews.com, or on our YouTube channel at the Capital News. And so I want to address these things, and I hope these individuals are still with this podcast. I don't know how long they've been with me, but both of these individuals, this is the first time that I've seen comments from them. I hope they didn't just sort of dine and dash. I hope that they are here to stay, to enjoy this interactive session, if you will, and hopefully they don't just want to listen to somebody who they're simply in agreement with. I don't want this podcast to be about preaching to the choir. That's too easy. I'm not here to do easy. I'm here to change people's minds, or to at least provide another perspective that maybe people are unaware of. Give it a little bit more color, a little bit more flavor. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a libertarian. And I have to take a little bit of an issue with the one comment, but it's one that we hear all the time, especially coming from Democrats and the left. And it's one that's going to be front and center in 2020. And there is something that I want to talk about in regards to the 2020 presidential campaign before we get kickstarted in all of this talk about free market capitalism. So before we go down this road of free market capitalism and those questions and comments from this audience, I do want to say that it appears that former Mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, is once again seriously contemplating entering the race on the Democratic ticket. Given the deadlines in registration for some states, I believe he had to file his intention to run in the state of Alabama. So he has filed that requisite paperwork, and it appears that he is, again, seriously contemplating getting back into the race. Not that I should say, because he was previously thinking about doing this. His hesitancy was surrounded really around whether or not Hillary Clinton would get into the race or Joe Biden. I think more primarily Joe Biden. Hillary Clinton, I think people were like, we can't really play this, we can't play this record again. So he was going to sort of sit it out, wait to see what Joe Biden did. If Joe Biden got in, Bloomberg was going to sit it out and probably support him with a lot of money. Bloomberg, I think, is in the top 10 wealthiest Americans, in the country. I think some $50-odd billion. Bloomberg Media, Bloomberg Terminal, with all that data and many other ventures that he is involved in. So he has the money, obviously, to self-fund his campaign if he wants to. He has name recognition. Obviously, being the former mayor of New York City, having some government experience as well, would make him somewhat of a formidable opponent on the Democratic ticket. Now, the problem, of course, is he's up against a whole bunch of lunatics, a bunch of people who declare themselves to be socialists or Democrat socialists. So when you look at it head-to-head, to get the nomination, you pretty much have to side with somebody that's more like an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders, as opposed to somebody who's a little bit more down the middle, like a Joe Biden or a Bloomberg. And that's why head-to-head, Joe Biden and or Michael Bloomberg would probably perform better against Donald Trump than Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, because I just simply think this country, the vast majority of this country, not the West Coast, not the East Coast, and really the Northeast, middle America, simply not ready for socialism. We should never be ready for socialism. Whether it's called socialism, progressivism, whether it's called democratic socialism, makes no difference. We should never be ready for that type of system. I hope the people of this country never deserve it. That's how bad it is. You have nothing but history telling us this, whether it's the former USSR, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party that exists today or the one that existed 80 years ago. You have 100 million people who were killed by their own government, by their own system. Some of them brutally killed. Others just simply allowed to starve to death. Those are the type of systems that are coming to this country from the left. They might be well-intentioned that they want to give everything away for free, but that's not how it works. Nothing's free. Everything comes with a price tag. And now you're starting to see how expensive free really is, because now finally you have Senator Elizabeth Warren coming out with some of her details to some of her plans. She has a plan for everything. Of course, there was no plan to pay for all of this stuff, but that recently came out, and you're talking trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And she thinks all you have to do is tax Warren Buffett and Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and a couple other rich people. Just tax them a few extra points, and that's it. Does this woman, has she ever take a math class? And I'm talking basic arithmetic. It doesn't work. So Bloomberg, if he gets in, I think he's starting to get the sense that Joe Biden could be in trouble. Gee, you think? No doubt about it. And that's Joe Biden. I mean, how many times do I got to tell this guy to go back to Delaware and take a nap, call it a day? You've done enough. You've done too much as it is. Forget the whole Ukraine business. Joe Biden, in my opinion, was in a lot of trouble anyway. Tack that onto it, he's got a lot of problems. And Donald Trump isn't going to back down to Joe Biden. I mean, quite frankly, he's not going to back down to anybody. That's Donald Trump's. That's his character. That's who he is. That's the politician that he portrays himself as. That he's the fighter. He's the counterpuncher. You know, he's not going to allow Joe Biden or anybody else to walk all over him as much as it's in his control. I think he'd have a much more difficult time doing that, walking over Michael Bloomberg. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, you don't amass a wealth of $50 billion by accident. I mean, you know, he has a steady hand. He delegates a lot of responsibility. That's not something that Donald Trump does too well. Donald Trump wants to be involved in pretty much everything. He wants to have a lot of control over all of these situations. Michael Bloomberg tends to be somebody who's a little bit more of a delegator. But, you know, he's not a radical leftist. And in fact, Michael Bloomberg used to be a Republican. So it would be quite the dynamic if you have Bloomberg, who used to be a Republican, then he was like an independent, then he's a Democrat now, going up against Donald Trump, who used to be a Democrat, who was going to run for president, I believe in 2004, as a Democrat against Bush. Now he's a Republican. So isn't that interesting? And they're both billionaires. So it would be very interesting to see that matchup, because when you have populism on both sides, on the right and on the left, and your two candidates are billionaires, there's some irony in that, isn't it? Massive wealth, income inequality. I mean, what a picture you're playing here when you have Donald Trump and potentially Michael Bloomberg on the other side. Of all of the candidates that are running right now, I really don't think a lot of them could stand up to Donald Trump effectively. I think Trump would probably mop the floor with Biden. Elizabeth Warren could probably handle him a little bit. I mean, she's proven herself to be somewhat formidable in these debates, and I give her credit for that. But I think when it really got down to it, if Donald Trump was really to put all of his weight and go after her, I don't think she could take it. Pete Buttigieg, not a chance. Not a chance. I've already seen some little flinching from him just from, you know, when Julian Castro got a little bit aggressive. You know, Pete sort of backed off. I mean, he's not ready to go after Trump, believe me when I tell you. And Bernie Sanders, I'm sure he could stand up against Trump, but people aren't ready to adopt that in this country. It's just not going to happen. At least it better not happen. So I think Bloomberg has an in. He can self-fund his campaign again. I think he's going to be somebody who's more centrist. There are policies that I'm aware of with Bloomberg that I personally don't like, but I'm going to not like a lot of policies no matter who the candidate is, including Donald Trump. I criticize a lot of what he has done during his 3 years in office and what he's continuing to do and not to do. There are things that I will applaud this president on. There are things that I will give credit where credit is due, no matter if that's a Republican, a Democrat, independent. If there's something that is worth noting, I make note of it. So this race, this circus, I told you it was going to get interesting. I told you, buckle up. So twisty and turvy, it's not even funny. But perfectly honest with you, I hope Bloomberg does get in. I hope he does, because he will be, I think, more of a sane voice. And the hurdle for the Democratic Party is so low. All you have to do, and I have to give credit to Bill Maher because I heard him say this, all the Democrats have to do is not be crazier than Donald Trump. Not be crazier than Donald Trump. They're having a hard time doing that. That's how low the bar is. Yet you're putting up Bernie Sanders, you're putting up Elizabeth Warren, you're putting up Joe Biden. Come on. That's the best you can do. This is exactly what happened with Obama and Romney. Republicans should have been able to mop the floor with Obama, but they didn't, because you put up Romney. He had no backbone. Couldn't even defend his career that enriched himself. Couldn't even do it. So he lost. It appears to me at this juncture, especially if Donald Trump skates this impeachment and really getting kicked out of office, he's likely to be impeached. Whether the Senate throws him out is another question. But if he gets through this, and it's this current field, minus Bloomberg, Donald Trump's probably going to win. He will probably win the presidency once again. And I've been consistent with this, and I remain in that vein. If Bloomberg gets in, then we'll have to see what happens. But right now, with these clowns that are running against Donald Trump, Trump will win. Again, if he can skate the whole impeachment thing. Now to free market capitalism. I want to take the time to read from our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, because in this book, we take the time to define a few words right from the outset, because we want our readers to understand where we as authors are coming from. I co-wrote this book. So we're going to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We want to define what free market capitalism is. We want to define what fascism is. We want to define what type of system we find ourselves operating within. Now, given the one comment from one of the members of this audience, basically saying that we never had free markets in this country, that's not true. And also notes Rockefeller and Standard Oil as an example. Well, if you listened to my podcast yesterday, this individual was actually making my point, because the system that we have here today is not free market capitalism. And this individual pointing out Rockefeller and Standard Oil is a great example of that. Because what did I say yesterday? We have big business and big government joined at the hip. And that is exactly how Rockefeller amassed his wealth. Now, of course, he was very wealthy to begin with, striking oil. This was a new industry with many new uses. So anything that was created was a new innovation. It was something that could be, protected by patents. It was something that was going to be used by everybody within that industry. And Rockefeller was a ruthless businessman, as are many other people who are in business. Being a ruthless businessman does not make you a bad or evil person, although Rockefeller does have some many bad qualities to him. But he amassed a lot of his protection for Standard Oil by doing exactly what I said, saying it's easier to reach into your pocketbook and buy off politicians. And that's exactly what Rockefeller did. It's exactly what he did. And if you understand the history of the Federal Reserve, because it's always about the Federal Reserve, Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan have their fingerprints all over the Federal Reserve, establishing the Federal Reserve, putting their top men in positions of power within the Federal Reserve, within major investment banks, boutique banks, who are going to directly profit from the actions of the Federal Reserve. This individual who claims that Rockefeller and Standard Oil, those types of people, is making my case. This individual is making my case. And I can assure you from the rest of the comment that they are probably more in agreement with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, which to me is ridiculous. Understand the history of this country. You do not have millions and millions and millions of people around this planet leaving their countries, their homes, their language, their culture, everything they know, to come to a country, this being the United States, to work under the heel and thumb of the likes of Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and Carnegie and Mellon and Vanderbilt, you know the names. Makes no sense. Henry Ford, all these people. They came here for opportunity because there was free market capitalism. You could work, you could make a living, and you weren't told when to get up, when to go to bed, how much you can buy. That's not how it works here in the United States. It's getting ever so much closer to that, but that's not how this country used to operate. Having free market capitalism led to those many advancements in technology, in manufacturing, in healthcare, everything under the sun. You don't have an iPhone in your hand. We don't have a microphone in front of my face right now and computer screens in front of me right now because we were communists or because we were socialists. That's not how it works. Because we're free market capitalists. That's how it works. Now, the big problem that we have here is that model by Rockefeller to pay off politicians. That happens everywhere. That's not right. But that's not free market capitalism. Do you honestly believe that everybody in the former USSR or the Chinese Communist Party, past or present, you think all of these people are saints and angels? You're an idiot if you honestly believe that. You're a fool if you believe the 535 idiots who we call Congress are all saints and angels. They're the most corrupt lot of them all. I try to provide perspective here. We spend $4 trillion at the federal government level. $4 trillion. We bring in 3. That's why we have a $1 trillion deficit. We can't even manage 3 trillion. We got to spend 4. $4 trillion? That's one of the largest economies in the world. Our federal government is one of the largest economies in the world. That was perspective. You think every dollar is accounted for? That's $4 trillion that's taken out of your pocket and my pocket. So again, proving my argument that this is not free market capitalism. So I'm glad that this individual made this comment because, again, I'm not here to preach to the choir. I hope this individual, again, was not just sort of, wine and dine and dash. Somebody who can remain with this podcast, who can take listening to opposing viewpoints. But you're not going to convince me to come to your side because this is what I do. This is what I study. I don't give a damn about the football score. I give a damn about our government, our policy, our country, what our politicians are doing, what the Federal Reserve is doing. That's what I study. That's what I care about because that affects my pocketbook. That affects my constitutional rights. What Tom Brady's doing, I couldn't care less. If he fascinates you, God bless you. He doesn't fascinate me. I am interested in what's going on here. Now, if they didn't affect my pocketbook personally, I wouldn't care. But they do. If they didn't affect my constitutional rights, I wouldn't care. But they do. And that's why I do this podcast. So to say that there was never free markets in this country is wrong. And to use Rockefeller and Standard Oil as an example proves my point that we currently do not have free market capitalism in this country because it has been hijacked. It is now fascism with a big dose of socialism. And we're going to get to that as I make my way through our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. So I hope this individual is starting to understand this. I hope they're still with this podcast and remain with us because we do enjoy having you. Again, I'm not here to preach to the choir, but you're going to have to do a lot better to convince me otherwise. This is what I study. This is what I read. These are the documentaries I watch. These are the professors I listen to and people who give lectures on this stuff. You're not going to convince me just because, well, you're upset that there are rich people in this country and you don't have some of that wealth. That's not going to do it. So let me start here with some of the definitions that we have in our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. And again, makes a great gift for this holiday season. Next, allow us to discuss some terms and their definitions as defined in this book. Let us start with free market capitalism. To reiterate, we believe that the United States has deviated from this economic system much to our detriment. Yet, free market capitalism needs to be explained further, so let us do that. Free market economics is minimal involvement from government regulation and intrusion. It provides for an open economy, thus espousing a belief in free trade. Further, it allows people to allocate their skills where best utilized. In short, it permits the individual to live his life how he sees fit, constrained only by his skill level, the demand for it, and his work ethic. Yet we can also elaborate further on free markets. Freedom, or being free, is the absence of force and or coercion, while the term markets describes individuals coming together to exchange goods and services at an agreed-upon price. To understand capitalism, we look to the root of the word capital. Capital comes into existence when you trade your time and labor for wages. From these wages, you have the ability to spend your money on the goods, services, and investments that you desire. Hopefully, some of your wages are saved, and from these savings, banks are then able to lend that money to grow and to support the economy. Continuing, these definitions are rather clear-cut, they are, and there is not anything fancy about free market capitalism. It is a simple system that allows people to do what they want with their resources of labor, time, and capital. It is a system that we find rather beautiful because it embraces the human spirit. There is no other system in the world that has elevated more people from the depths of poverty, sickness, and tyranny than has free market capitalism. We believe in the human spirit. From this, we see ourselves as unique individuals capable of accomplishing nearly any feat, constrained only by our collective consciousness and imagination. Free market capitalism is simply a system that allows for the human spirit to take root, planted by individual passions and ventures, and harvested by the collective society. So that's a break from that for right now, and I'll get back to it. But what I stated there is exactly what I stated yesterday. This is what I believe, folks. This book was published in 2015. And I believe in yesterday's podcast, I misstated. I said, I think, when we were writing this book, I said in yesterday's podcast that we were bearish then. No, not then. We were bullish. I repeat, we were bullish when we were writing this book because there were still things that were pointing to growth in the underlying economy, especially globally. And I still believe that there was a lot of juice at the time left from the Federal Reserve and all of this money printing. Not that we agreed with it, but the objective of this book is to observe the marketplace, observe the economy, observe the markets, and then do our best to allocate our portfolio to profit from this. Okay, now, 4 or 5 years onward, I'm saying diminishing marginal returns has kicked in and that the Federal Reserve and other central banks are running out of ammunition. So what did we state here? What did we state here? We said, look, free market capitalism is a simple system. And being free is the absence of coercion, the absence of force. Where does force come from? It comes from government. And let me give you an example, because I'm not going to put words in the individual of this. I'm not going to put words in the mouth of this individual who made this comment, I should say. But just as an example, you might not like Walmart. Okay, you don't like Walmart. You might not like McDonald's. Okay, you don't like McDonald's. You may not like Caterpillar. Okay, that's fine. You may not like Nike. Okay, that's fine. You may not like Apple. Guess what? That's fine too. They can't force you to do anything. If you don't want an iPhone, go buy something else. Go to Samsung. Go to Google. Go to Microsoft. You have options. You have choices. If you don't like Walmart, go to another store. Walmart can't force you to walk into their store. Caterpillar can't make you buy a front-end loader or an excavator. You can go to John Deere, you can go to Komatsu, you can go to somebody else. You don't like McDonald's? Go to Burger King. Go to Chipotle. Go to the grocery store and make your own meal. You can't be forced to walk into these establishments and buy their goods and services. But guess who can make you do that? The government. And they do it to the tune of $4 trillion at the federal level. You tack on states and localities, it's $6 trillion. $6 trillion that we spend on an annual basis in this country. 6 trillion of a GDP that's slightly around 20 trillion. And what do we have to show for it? Absolutely nothing. Decaying infrastructure, decaying schools, healthcare costs that are out of control, educational costs at the collegiate and university level that are out of control, endless wars. You have nothing to show for it. Nothing. So again, to this individual who believes that we don't have, that free market never existed in this country, which again is not true, but now is basically saying, I would have to assume, that we have to move forward with a more progressive, a more socialistic looking type of policy. It makes no sense whatsoever. The problems that we have are because we have adopted those policies of socialism and fascism. And let me explain that to you. Continuing with our book. Now that you have the definition of free market capitalism, we now ask that you take a moment and ask yourself if the United States is truly a free market capitalistic system. We say no. With the degree of government involvement in the economy, one would be challenged to argue that this is a free market society. We will discuss the Federal Reserve System in subsequent sessions, but suffice to say that fractional reserve banking is not capitalism when money can be created from nothing. We believe that what we are currently experiencing more closely resembles a corporate state, which, by definition, is fascism. We will offer our definition on this in a moment. We do not want to dwell too long on free market capitalism, but we would challenge you to find a better system that has transformed the world for the better to the degree that free market capitalism has. When we use the terms fascism or corporatism, what we are referring to is the close relationship between big government and big business. Some may use the terms quasi-capitalism or crony capitalism, whichever you prefer is fine, but for the purpose of this book, just recall that it pertains to the cozy big government, big business relationship. Is it any wonder why some of the wealthiest counties in this country are in close proximity to Washington, D.C.? Lastly, on this point, please understand the function of the marketplace is to find equilibrium, which is accomplished through price discovery. When the government and Federal Reserve intervene in the markets, which is a perpetual occurrence, prices and thus markets become distorted. Such distortions can yield many opportunities and in turn profits for those who know where to look. We will talk more about this in subsequent sections, but note that these distortions give rise to the business cycle or the booms and busts that we have come to experience. Exactly what we talk about on this podcast on a daily basis. Exactly why this podcast was established back in February of this year. You want to understand what's going on? You buy this book. You would have been prepared for what you're witnessing right now if you had this book in your hand 4 years ago. You would know how to traverse these markets. And believe me, it's not easy right now because as cynical as I am, wrote a book on it, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, I didn't think there'd be a lot more juice left in the tank when it came to all of this money printing. But people are so brainwashed that the Federal Reserve can continue to save the day. We're getting a little bit of at least a run-up. I don't know if it's going to turn into a melt-up. I think it's a coin toss at this point as to whether or not it turns into a melt-up, which means we're going to run up another 10, 20%, maybe even more. But it's a coin toss at this juncture. But, you're supposed to buy low and sell high. We're making all-time highs. So do you want to continue to buy? Look at Warren Buffett and his right-hand man, Charlie Munger. They're hoarding cash. They're waiting for some sort of big correction so they can go buy things for pennies on the dollar. That's what you should be doing too. You're supposed to buy low, sell high. Okay? So I hope I'm making sense with these definitions. And I can almost guarantee that this individual who commented, that he and I are on the same page with not liking the current system that we have, not liking this cozy relationship between big business and big government. And that's what this book is all about. That's what we talk about, this divide and conquer strategy that exists from the elite in this country. Put people in their silos, let the leftists go over there, let the righties go over there, the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, let them think that they are completely different entities, when in reality, there's a lot of overlap between the two. Tea Party was marching on Washington, D.C. because they were taxed enough already, TEA for tea. Then you got Occupy Wall Street, people who are upset that Wall Street got bailed out and Main Street didn't. You know how much overlap exists between those two groups? Yet where do they stand? Polar opposite of each other. Polar opposite. You think that's by coincidence? You think that's by design? It's by design. It's by design, because those who have amassed their wealth and power through fraudulent means, through the establishment of the Federal Reserve, through the establishment of the federal income tax, which were both established in 1913, by the way, if you think that's a coincidence, I got a bridge to sell you. That's the problem with this country. And that's why I tell you time and time again, you will not solve a damn thing so long as you have a Federal Reserve and a federal income tax. They both need to be abolished. Gone tomorrow. Should have been gone yesterday. But tomorrow's the best day for it. And it's not going to happen anytime soon because got to know what that football score is. Don't want to understand the history of this country. Don't want to understand, and you're making my point with Rockefeller because, hey, guess what? Guess what we talk about in this book, if you can believe it? We talk about Rockefeller in Standard Oil because you know what happened at that time? The government was getting all hot and bothered with the amount of wealth that he amassed, even though it was at the hand of the government. But people were starting to get upset with all of this. And they said, well, we gotta bust them up. We gotta bust these monopolies up. Well, they did. And guess what happened? You have Standard Oil turn into ExxonMobil. Yeah, the very ExxonMobil that exists today. And then you have, I think it was Chevron and a couple other companies. So you have one company now turning into several. What do you think happened? Because all of these companies were publicly traded. He amassed even more wealth because now he doesn't. It's just not all contained in one company. He's like, my goodness, I got a. Let's just call it for the sake of argument today. I got $100 billion company over here, $150 billion company over there, a $200 billion company over there, and all combined, I'm even wealthier than I was before. So the government gets it wrong on both sides of the coin. Get out of it. Get out of it. And people who advocate for more government, it's mind-boggling. That is the problem. You are not forced to buy gasoline from ExxonMobil. You are not forced to buy food or clothes from Walmart. Go somewhere else. But if the government's dictating to you what to do, you have to do it. You have no choice, or they're going to lock you up and throw away the key, or they're going to fine you, or they're going to take your money right out of your paycheck. That's how they operate. How people don't understand this is totally beyond me. I cannot comprehend it. Unless there's something missing in their brain or they have sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies that they want to control and manipulate everybody, because that's exactly what government does. And if you don't want to read the history of the economic history of this country, okay, I understand that. At least read some of our founding documents. This country was established to protect the individual from government. So how can you be an advocate for ever increasing government? It makes no sense whatsoever. None. Now, I know I said there was another comment that was made in regards to why I think the global economy continues to slow. I'll probably answer that a little bit in greater detail tomorrow. We go over this stuff all the time, but this might be an individual who's new to the program. But just given a lot of the economic data that continues to come out, particularly a lot of the purchasing manager numbers, the PMIs that I talk about, a lot of these numbers continue to be in contraction, below 50, below a number of 50. And even services, that's particularly true of manufacturing, but when it comes to services, a lot of those numbers are still north of 50, but they're starting to slow down. They're starting to get closer and closer to 50, and it's just a matter of time before they likely enter contraction as well, and you will feel those effects around the global economy because those numbers are leading economic indicators. So that is why I believe that the global economy continues to slow down. And tomorrow, I hope to go into greater detail into that because, again, I want this to be interactive. I love the comments, especially the ones that disagree with me. And I honestly mean that. But you're not going to make a comment like that on something that I study and really enjoy learning about, and you're just not going to convince me. You're just not going to do it. There are a lot of things. I'm a very open-minded person, and if you want to comment on some other things, politically speaking, we'll have that debate. That's what I want this podcast to be about. So I appreciate the comments, and I'm going to wrap this up here. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. Please like, share, subscribe, leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.